Welcome to my channel. These events unfolded several years prior, before the Waldorf Astoria initiated its renovation. The grand hallway extended from Park Avenue to Lexington Avenue. At its center, a magnificently adorned and gold-plated clock stood, crowned by the Statue of Liberty. When you visit, I'm certain it will still be there for viewing. This landmark is an ideal spot to commence celebrating a wedding anniversary. Robert Jones, a seasoned editor at a renowned newspaper, briskly walked down the street amidst swirling snowflakes to meet his spouse of 25 years, a successful marketing executive who, as usual, had arrived on time. They were a robust duo, accomplished, esteemed, autonomous, and deeply committed to each other. Robert, an elegantly aging man, was known for his charisma and keen intellect, which rendered him invaluable in the chief news section. He was also instrumental in numerous triumphant marketing campaigns within the cosmetics sector. Charming in her own right and recognized for her intolerance of incompetence, irrespective of race, creed, or gender, Robert reached into his pocket countless times he had done so in his rush. Christmas coincided with their 25th wedding anniversary. Inside a slender box was a diamond necklace he crafted for her, featuring 25 stones, each symbolizing his enduring affection. He had discreetly amassed funds for years to purchase this gift, known for his love of eloquent words. The box featured a detailed engraving "Our love and diamonds, why such a lavish present." Naturally, 25 years was a significant milestone, and Christmas had always been a cherished time for them. They first met at a Christmas Eve gathering and hosted a celebratory party annually in homage to this festive occasion. Owing to the snow, the evening felt extraordinary, and his excitement mounted as he hastened towards his beloved. A Salvation Army brass quartet played near Central Station, and crossing the street, he paused to make a donation. This delay was involuntary, yet he was moved by the Christmas spirit. There had been challenging times in their life together. Anne's professional advancement at her firm had burdened her with added responsibilities and frequent travel requirements. Robert managed a team of youthful, energetic reporters with ample potential yet inexperienced enough to potentially embroil his cherished newspaper in legal troubles, if not meticulously supervised. Their encounters had become infrequent, and Robert feared they were becoming accustomed to this distance. Anne had proposed that they might not focus so heavily on holidays and explore individual interests, together or separately. He hoped to recapture Anne's focus and lure her back to rekindle their union. He was confident she would never betray him. Their bond had always been solid, and his trust in her was unwavering. It never occurred to Robert to question whether Anne was content with their relationship's status. Some things, after all, are assumed under the guise of trust. Robert carried flowers, humming a Christmas melody as he walked energetically, eager to envelop Anne in an embrace and whisk her away into the enchanting evening he had arranged. At that moment, several men exited a bar, and Anne, who was standing near the clock and scanning her surroundings, seemed joyful and was invariably punctual. While Robert was often late, Anne greeted him, "Hello, my love." One man from the group stepped forward, enveloped her in a tight hug, and tenderly kissed her on the lips. Caught off guard, she instinctively reciprocated his kiss deeply. "Mike, darling, what are you doing here?" she exclaimed, realizing her husband might arrive any moment. Visibly shaken, she pulled away, but it was already too late. Robert had seen everything. He paused and stepped back to observe what would unfold next, and Anne continued to look around, visibly anxious. "I'm in town for a quick meeting, then heading out from Kennedy Airport to London on the earliest flight tomorrow morning. Are you free tonight?" he asked, as Robert, unbeknownst to himself, slowly approached them, his anxiety mounting. Who was this man? What was his relationship with Anne? He noticed the wrapped gift in her hands. Was it meant for him or this stranger, following their apparent loving kiss in such a public setting? Robert Jones, he introduced himself. Anne's expression stiffened, her eyes darting between her lover and her husband. "I see you know my wife. And you are Bill." "Bill Johnson," came the faltering reply. Bill looked helplessly at Anne, unsure of what to say. "I see I've caught you both at an inconvenient time. You two should catch up. There are plenty of vacant rooms in the hotel if you haven't booked one already. I must go, and maybe we'll see each other later." "I'll call a cab," Robert said, fumbling in his pocket for his phone. Instead, he accidentally pulled out the gift box and watched as Anne nervously twisted her own gift in her hands, unsure of what to do next. "Don't worry, I'll find my way," Robert said, glancing down at the sleek, shiny box tied with a sparkling black ribbon. Tears welled up in his eyes. "No matter what, this is for you," he stated as he handed her the necklace and turned to leave. Behind him, he could hear them exchanging harsh words, but he stopped listening. He needed to get away. What had he missed while being so engrossed in work? How could Anne betray him like this? Robert, she called after him, but he was already ascending the top step of the staircase. Her voice neared, yet he had reached the exit. A taxi was waiting, and he swiftly entered. Robert provided the driver with an address and vanished. Anne watched as the taxi blended into the flow of traffic, a lone taxi in a multitude of cars, impossible to trace. How had she let this happen? She had been so cautious. How could she have known she'd run into Bill? How could he have been so careless and overt in his approach, potentially ruining everything? How could this be mended, if at all? Bill, having separated from his group, finally caught up with her. "Anne, are you okay? Do you think he suspected anything?" "You saw that he understood everything." "Of course he suspected," Anne replied, her voice tinged with regret. She nodded at Bill, telling him it wasn't his fault, yet her entire demeanor conveyed blame. What right did he have to approach her so publicly, where anyone could see? Couldn't he have simply greeted her and moved on? This was a catastrophe. Anne was distraught. She knew she had to rearrange her schedule to make time for her husband. She planned to talk to Robert and explain how they needed to work through this unfortunate situation. She thought about what she would say to reconcile with Robert. It seemed like a solid plan, and she saw no reason why it wouldn't be effective. Robert stared out the taxi window at the passing lights, pondering what he had missed. When had Anne drifted so far? Was he angry? He felt it, but if so, why hadn't he lashed out? Instead, he was alone, fleeing from the wife he cherished, engulfed in silent mutual recriminations, struggling to hold back tears. Whatever he felt, it transcended mere anger. For the first time in his life, Robert Jones was at a loss. He felt blindsided, forsaken, and betrayed. When Anne returned home, Robert wasn't there, and unsurprisingly so. She changed clothes, dragged a chair from the living room to the hallway, and sat down, waiting for her husband's return. She awoke at sunrise to find he hadn't come home. It was Saturday. He must have rented a room. She convinced herself he would return today. She fought the urge to call his mobile, telling herself he needed time to think. When he calms down, as he always does, we'll talk and resolve everything, she assured herself. By noon, Anne was anxious. By 3 in the afternoon, she was in a full-blown panic and started calling his mobile, the office, the gym, 2 bars he frequented, half a dozen of his friends, and his mother, with whom she had never gotten along. By Sunday, no one had any information about his whereabouts. She contacted the NYPD, the FBI, the state police, and any other authority she could think of. A private investigator was employed, of course. She undertook all these measures because her husband was missing and she was desperate to locate him. For some urgent reason, she thought it might help to venture into the city and search for Robert herself. However, the throngs of people out shopping rendered her search efforts futile. When she enlisted the help of her sister Beth, her family realized for the first time just how critical the situation was. By Sunday dinner, Anne's 2 sisters and their spouses, their kids, her parents, her Aunt Beverly, Robert's mother, some of Robert's oldest friends, and her immediate work colleagues had congregated in the dining room, listening to the detective explain that people often go missing during the holidays, a prime time for emotional upheaval, particularly Christmas. There was no indication of an accident or that Robert was harmed. He likely experienced a significant emotional upset. This comment drew several sharp looks towards Anne. From what the detective had gathered, Robert was a level-headed man. They should allow him some time to come forward and explain his side of the story. Anne became incensed, shouting that they couldn't just wait and see if Robert's body turned up in the river. She demanded that the detective prioritize her case over others and find her husband. Didn't they comprehend her urgency? Anne felt an overwhelming need to speak with him to clarify things. If something bad happened to Robert, how would he ever comprehend her actions? How could he forgive her? How could she forgive herself? The detective said everything expected of him and discreetly left. In reality, there was little more he could accomplish. This predicament was Anne's to resolve. His exit signaled the start of a heated argument among those present, who claimed they had connections that could assist and then retreated to their mobile phones as if they had suddenly discovered something significant to do. Anne's brother led the criticism of the police for their inaction. Both mothers empathized with the misfortune that had struck their families. Indeed, they felt helpless and dreaded the potential outcomes. Anne sensed her sister's scorn. Beth declared the Christmas dinner cancelled and suggested that the family should distance themselves from one another for a while. As voices escalated and then quieted, Anne's anger drained away, replaced by fear as she realized. When Beth spoke up, she had no influence in this gathering. What could she say to people who seemed to care about her husband more than she did? Anne discovered the stark reality of isolation as the house eventually emptied. She ascended to her bedroom to change. The dress she had worn since Friday evening was still on the bed. She picked it up and noticed the gift box. It wasn't his final words, but what had he said as he departed? "Whatever happens, this is for you." Anne read the inscription, opened the box, and with trembling hands took out the sparkling necklace. Overwhelmed, she fainted, collapsing while still clutching the necklace. There were 3 days left, late and Christmas, and her husband remained unaccounted for. The police in the city have dormitories where they can eat and sleep during extended shifts. Journalists are aware of these locations and have contacts who will accommodate them for a few nights when they choose not to or cannot return home. Robert had utilized these facilities on previous occasions. The office was a 30-minute walk, and Robert was still in the same clothes he had worn 3 nights earlier. A brief stop at a men's clothing store rectified this, followed by another quick stop where he purchased a razor and shaving cream. No matter the circumstances, he still had obligations the newspaper needed to be published as deadlines were unforgiving. He utilized his voicemail to review messages, conducted a conference with his colleagues at 9:15, met with key individuals until noon, and dedicated the afternoon to drafting an article about sea level rise. The newspaper functioned like a typical large organization. If you didn't know precisely how to contact someone you needed, there was no straightforward way to do so. If Anne tried to reach him, she was unsuccessful. Well, that was that. Anne, meanwhile, was beside herself. Her father was poised to suggest she return home, but that would only exacerbate matters. Her team scoured hotels, motels, and various potential hiding spots from Boston to Washington. She transformed her entire department into an impromptu investigative team. If upper management disapproved, she was indifferent. At one point, Anne was overheard insisting that they begin searching under bridges, a sign of her escalating desperation. Holly, the senior graphic designer, cracked the case. Her father had been with the NYPD, and she knew the police had rest spots. Within 20 minutes, Anne had a list of addresses and phone numbers, and within 2 more minutes, every dormitory was contacted. Once Robert's location was confirmed, Anne was on her way. Robert was feeling somewhat better. The duty sergeant had reassured him he could stay as long as necessary. Work appeared to be proceeding smoothly. On a beautifully crisp, clear morning, he decided to take a walk and saw Anne approaching, no more than 50 feet away. "Robert, I've been searching for you everywhere and you found me," Robert replied, feeling oddly detached as if observing the scene from outside himself. He wondered why he wasn't more emotional. Something was shifting within him, but he couldn't pinpoint what it was. He could see Anne clearly, yet despite his acute awareness of her presence, he felt numb inside. He realized he should be more upset, yet he wasn't. Had he become devoid of all emotion? "Please, Robert, let me explain. I didn't mean to hurt you. I didn't want you to find out like this." "Of course, Anne, but really, what is there to say? That you have affairs with other men? Now I know. That you hid it from me? I know that too. That you were caught only by chance? Well, I was there. I don't want to hear the sordid details or any trivial excuses. That it was just physical and meant nothing. What can you possibly say?" Anne felt Robert slipping away and moved toward him, trying to physically bridge their emotional gap. "Do we have to talk about this here? Can't we go somewhere and discuss everything, Anne? I learned of this in a hotel." "Hobby. What could be more public than that? If you have something to say, I suggest you say it now." This halted her mid-step, realizing she couldn't soothe Robert into a false sense of normalcy and then gradually wear him down. "Okay, Robert, let's talk. I love you so much. I've always loved you, but I started feeling restless. I didn't know what was wrong, and I didn't know how to tell you because I didn't understand it myself. When I got the promotion and spent so much time traveling, I was around many different men who noticed me. Sometimes they flirted with me, and I realized I liked it. Their attention was new and made me feel appreciated as a woman, something I needed, and I couldn't ask that of you. Would you have allowed me that? We've been together so long, it wouldn't have been fair, and you could have shared this with me at any time that my beautiful wife gets compliments. Do you think I'm such a fool to be surprised or jealous? Was there something else? Did you have an encounter with someone else? No details needed, just yes or no." Anne looked down and hesitated. To her credit, she met her husband's gaze and answered yes. "And here we are. I don't know why or how we got here. I can't pinpoint where I failed you so profoundly that I lost you, but clearly I did." Robert heard himself saying goodbye. Was he doing this because Anne had confirmed his worst fears, or was it a subconscious decision he made when he left Anne with her lover at the hotel? He couldn't tell. All he knew was that the words spilled from his lips. It felt as if someone else had seized control of his mind and body, and he was merely a spectator. Robert realized he was walking past his wife, going his separate way. Anne stood there, stunned, trying to process what her husband had just articulated and done. It was just a fling, a bit of excitement. It meant nothing. "I love only you," she had explained everything. Why couldn't he understand that? Why wouldn't he believe her? The city blocks in downtown Manhattan are short on the north-south streets, but long on the east-west streets. A native New Yorker, Anne found herself lost on her way back to her office. She searched for landmarks to guide her, but she was too preoccupied. She replayed Robert's words in her mind. He didn't mean all that, did he? Her feet ached, she was cold, and her phone kept ringing, so she turned it off. There was a coffee shop, and she found an empty seat. Why was Robert so upset, so hurt? He hadn't really demanded details. How many men? Were they better lovers? Were they wealthier? Were they more impressive physically or more skilled in intimacy? Isn't that what men want to know, the words they could throw back in her face? All the potential reasons didn't matter. Robert simply didn't want to know. The mere fact that Anne had concealed her actions was enough to devastate him. Had she underestimated him? Was Robert truly that fragile? Why hadn't he fought back? He should have claimed her and fought for her. That's what men are supposed to do. It struck her later, like a sharp pain. No, fool, you broke your husband's heart because you didn't believe he would listen. You never gave him the chance to discuss what you wanted. You never told him you were changing. You didn't give him the opportunity to find ways for both of you to make it work. Why should Robert believe you now? When you never trusted him before? No, Anne, the truth is that you were scared Robert would refuse, and even if he did, you would still have cheated on him. You didn't love him enough to be honest and live with the consequences. You put your lover and yourself before him. You lied, you betrayed him for mere physical gratification, and now you can't bear the consequences. The lies we tell ourselves are destructive. The truth, if told too late and for the wrong reasons, can be even more damaging. And her conversation with Robert was a blunder, yet another catastrophe. Anne picked up the phone but then slowly set it down again. Robert was right, she had nothing left to say to him or anyone else. She had wrecked everything. Christmas came and went. Beth softened, and the family gathered on Christmas Eve to feast and exchange gifts. Anne was invited, but she knew it was better not to attend. No one wanted her there. A few weeks later, while Anne was on a long conference call, her father called to inform her that she needed to take an emergency call. Robert was in a psychiatric ward under observation. He had attempted suicide after not showing up at work for 2 days. The police had been notified because Robert was found with a loaded gun and a suicide note. Would she come? She was listed as the emergency contact at his office. Anne was already on her way, as her colleagues provided Robert's room number and the doctor's name. By the time she arrived, Anne had composed herself and demanded to see her husband and his doctors immediately. At the meeting, there were 2 doctors, both specialists in psychiatry. One was the author of a respected textbook, the other a principal investigator leading a national study on depression and suicide among middle-aged men. One of them said, "Your husband is very ill. He is in a state of clinical depression, has formulated a suicide plan, and has taken steps to obtain a weapon. He poses a clear danger to himself, if not to others. We are taking him off heavy medication in hopes of giving him a chance to regain his strength." Whatever led him to this state was a shock, but he wasn't disclosing what triggered it. "We were hoping you could clarify things for us," the doctors suggested, jotting down notes and conferring as if it mattered, but it didn't seem to assist Robert. "I need to speak with my husband." "When can I see him?" Anne inquired. "We can arrange for you to see your husband, but it has to be through a two-way mirror for now. We can't risk any interaction that might exacerbate his condition, which sadly might include a meeting with you," they replied. Was that a bruise on one side of his face? He hadn't shaved in weeks, and his hair looked as if it hadn't been cut since she last saw him. Had he even washed? His hospital gown revealed his thin legs. He appeared old, neglected, homeless, and unkempt. His hands were cuffed, and his head swayed from side to side. He was muttering something under his breath, a word she couldn't decipher. What was he doing with his fingers? She moved closer to the glass. The attending doctor didn't stop her. Was he pointing at something? The ceiling? The walls? Did Robert notice her? It seemed like he sensed her presence and started shouting louder. Was he calling her name? It appeared so to Anne. Was Robert mimicking shooting himself with his hand and fingers? Was he aiming at his head? Was he still contemplating ending his life? Anne left without a word. For the first time, she recognized the gravity of her actions and realized what she needed to do. Visiting hours ended at 8 p.m. At 7:30, a family van pulled up. It looked like a mother and daughter coming to visit their husband and father. The security check was cursory, and while the guard was distracted, the mother passed her purse to the daughter through the metal detector unnoticed. Just before closing, the daughter left, and the mother went upstairs. Psychiatric wards are designed more to keep patients in than to keep people out. Anne hung her coat on a hook and donned a starched white lab coat, carrying a clipboard and a sample tray. She had no trouble finding the key at the sleeping nurse's station to enter Robert's room. She sat before him for what seemed like hours. Gradually, as the medication's effects diminished, Robert regained consciousness. She must have dozed off because when she looked again, Robert was awake and staring intently at her. "Why are you here?" he asked. "You asked me to come, and I am your wife," Anne replied. Robert looked away. "Robert, you told me what you wanted. You told me what to do," she said, pulling a small gun from her pocket. "I know you want to end this because of what I did. You want to die, and so do I. We once had a good life together. Let's end it the same way. I'll go first, then you, and maybe we'll meet on the other side." Robert looked at his wife, seeing the woman he married and recalling all their good times. She had her plan, but he had his own. To Anne, it felt like Robert was really seeing her for the first time, and she had never felt more uncertain. "Give me the gun." "Check the hallway," she said, handing him the gun. The hallway was empty. She thought her mind would be racing, but it wasn't. What would it be like to end her life? Could she do it? Could she place the gun to her head and pull the trigger? It sounded like a plan, but it really wasn't. She was escaping her own life. Part of Anne hoped that after death, they would truly be together. If not, at least she would share her husband's fate. In their mutual decision to end it all, there was a dignity that Anne could accept. "They come by every half hour. Keep an ear out. After the next round, we'll do it," Anne watched, waiting. It was her obligation. She owed it to her husband to be with him. Her throat tightened, but she resolved to follow through. It was the only way to amend the pain and suffering she had caused. She closed her eyes and whispered a brief prayer to anyone who might listen, hoping that she and Robert would be together eternally. "It's time, let's do this. Sit on the bed, you first," she directed. She hadn't been this close to Robert since that night, and it made her nervous, but it made sense the gun would fall within Robert's reach. She took the gun, noting it felt less cold than she expected. "Don't hesitate," she told herself as she placed the barrel against her temple. She mouthed "I'm sorry" to her husband and pulled the trigger. Nothing happened. She tried again, and yet again, nothing. What was wrong? Everything was unraveling differently from how she intended. She planned to free Robert and be with him, but the gun failed. Looking up, her hands clutching her last failure as a wife, her eyes welled with tears. What a tremendous risk, so many ways it could have gone wrong. Even. As he left that night, Robert knew Anne would muster all her strength to find him. She would have mobilized her entire staff, called everyone, hired professionals, and even bribed newspaper staff to report on him. She told herself she was just trying to find her husband when, in reality, she was attempting to control him. First find him, then soothe him with love and guilt. Gently, she would coax him back from the brink, hoping things could return to how they were. Perhaps Robert could reconcile with his wife, but he would never tolerate Anne's succession of new lovers. Life or death, that's what it all came down to. Could their marriage survive or would it end? Robert couldn't say. When Anne showed him the gun, he easily took it from her and unloaded it, but none of this drama mattered if they didn't see the act through to its conclusion. Robert doubted she would actually do it. She might place the gun against her head, but never pull the trigger. To his astonishment, Anne squeezed the trigger. How could she do it? With newfound respect, Robert looked at his wife and saw her in a completely new light. He smiled, and Anne looked at him in confusion. Robert opened his left hand to reveal the bullets. He extended his right hand to her, and Anne took it, pulling him close. She clung to him for a long time. It's time to go home, wife, and they lived happily ever after. Yes, it took time, very good lawyers, and a lot of effort to convince the medical staff before they were allowed to leave. Who was at fault? Does it matter? Who deserved more blame? Who cares? Life is short, love is rare. When you find true love, hold on tightly, never let go. Pray for help and fight to the end. Thank you for being with us and listening until the end. If you found this interesting, please subscribe, give us a like, and leave your comments. We'll see you on the Cheating Stories.